Black Law's Dictionary defines oppression as a misdemeanor committed by a public officer who, under color of his office, wrongfully inflicts upon any person any bodily harm, imprisonment, or other injury, an act of cruelty, severity, unlawful exaction, or excessive use of authority, an act of subjecting to cruel and unjust hardship, an act of domination. Notice the level of crime that oppression actually is. It is actually a misdemeanor, meaning offenses lower than felonies and generally those punishable by fine or imprisonment, otherwise than in penitentiary. So when police officers shoot at us, curse at us, intimidate us, arrest us, and or detain us without just cause, not only is that an act of oppression, but such an act technically is not even a felony. This is my observations. This, in my observations, is the cause of such lawlessness, urban violence, and police misconduct. We hip hoppers must rise above the condition if we are to ever truly be free. If we are to really continue our parents' and grandparents' struggle for freedom and justice, civil rights, at some point we're going to have to consider governing ourselves, which means obedience to our own laws and respect for our own traditions. We are going to have to keep the police and other law enforcement officers out of the communities by abiding by our own laws, which even they would be forced to obey once within our self-governed community. We all live in a nation under we live in a nation under a government that presently ignores our existence and self-expression as hip hoppers. Yet we are threatened with prison and forced at gunpoint to obey the laws of such a government, even though such laws do not have our best interests in mind. For us, this is evil. Such government has no idea who its citizens are, and our hip hop observations, such cultural illiteracy, is the cause of so much of America's social ills. A good government recognizes not only my right to exist, but also the usefulness of my existence, and puts me in my rightful social place. This is called order, and such order exists hand in hand with law. An ordered society seeks the condition in which every part of it is in its rightful place, where every citizen is where they are supposed to be and doing what they are supposed to be doing, based upon their own individual nature and purpose, supported by a government which they voluntarily serve. The United States suffers today economically not only because it is repeatedly breaking its own laws and traditions while oppressing its population, but simply because it is not making good use of its talented citizens. Let us pray for change. However, such conditions have already begun to change because we hip hoppers are now ready to change them. Many of us have now grown up and are beginning to take the seats of political office once reserved for those who sought to exploit our resources and ignore our real existence. But how shall we behave when we are in power? Shall we simply continue the same oppression on some other group seeking existence, or shall we be fair and just in our administering of justice? Such an answer does not come when we are in power. Such an answer is performed by us amongst us today. It is a complete waste of our revolutionary efforts to complain about issues we ourselves have not matured beyond. When we protest unjust situations, we should be able to do better than the situations we are protesting against. We should not just culturally scream out when we are hit by injustice. We should take the hit as an act of validation toward our authority to speak into existence a new nation. This is what our King taught us. Our King taught us to endure injustice so that you might be validated to speak against it. Those who have not been hit with the sting of injustice lack the real authority to speak against it. Yes, you may definitely protest the injustice you see, or hear, or even read about, simply just because of your own sense of right and wrong, good and evil. But ultimately, the authentic authority to plan and act against injustice comes only from those directly suffering from it. Even if others decide to help us out of our unjust situation simply because they recognize the injustice of our situation, it is still us who must have a vision and a plan of action for ourselves. Others can only assist and help us achieve victory over oppression, but ultimately it is we who must know what a better situation looks and feels like. We simply have to get clear about what we actually want. This creates purpose, and purpose creates vision, and vision creates movement, and movement creates history. And history creates tradition, and tradition creates morality, and from our own sense of morality come our principles, and it is our principles that create our laws, which exist to protect and further develop the existence of our group. Living by some other society's laws and tradition hinders us from experiencing our own. A society that expects us to obey their laws and traditions without ever asking us about our existence of our laws and traditions is indeed an oppressive society. However, such oppression can only be continued if we allow it to continue through the oppressions of ourselves.